Hello there. I'm really bad at saying hello and goodbye, so this is me saying hello. Nice to meet you. If this is your first time, then welcome to my little Henry VIII mini-series. This video is part 6 in the series if you haven't been able to tell from the title. If you haven't watched parts 1 through 5, I'll include the link below in the description as well as in this video. Definitely recommend checking it out, but if not, hey, let's just pick up here, shall we? For the handful of you who have been watching my videos regularly, you could tell that some things have changed. I'm gonna just get this out the way. My hair looks very different. I'm not too happy with it, but it is what it is. So now that that's out of the way, let's move on. Oh, yes. One more thing, I promise. My little disclaimer, I decided to start doing a disclaimer before I go into the video. So here it is. By no means am I an expert of history. I'm just a lover of history and a student of history. So definitely don't use me as a source in any type of papers you're doing for school. I try to do as much research as possible and use as many valid sources as possible, but I'm not the end all be all. So please feel free to check me in the comments if I'm saying anything that's dated or just downright inaccurate. With that said, be nice. Be nice. Don't have to be mean. I'm asking the internet not to be mean. That's kind of stupid, but. And if you like my channel, you like old dirty history, please feel free to hit that subscribe button and like button down there below me here. Just go ahead and click it. So now that we have that out of the way, let's get started. So in part 5, we left off where Henry finally gets what he has wanted for so long, and that was to leave his wife Catherine, who he had been with for 25 years. And he leaves her for this young, entrancing woman named Anne Boleyn. So anyway, Henry and Anne, they're finally together. They're finally wedded. Anne is queen, technically. And Henry has pretty much pushed his first wife, Catherine, out of the castle. He was like,
"Bitch be gone! Bitch be gone!"
She was gone to go live in another castle called the Moor Castle. I'm sure Anne was very happy that she was now in this great position. However, with that came a lot of enemies. There were a lot of people at court who were looking at Henry and Anne like, how did this commoner get into this position? What is she doing here? She ain't one of us. She's a commoner. Blah, 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 blah. And the other thing was Henry gave Anne a lot more power than Catherine had. Or maybe it's just because of the type of woman Anne was. She was involved with a lot of international affairs. I mentioned in a previous video that Anne spent a good chunk of her life living in French court, having that connection, that relationship with the French, and was able to broker a relationship between Henry and the French. Henry had a long-standing beef with the French. I mean, England has had a long-standing beef with the French all in all. So, this was good. But a lot of people saw that as Anne having way too much power. So Anne's first task on her agenda was to, of course, give Henry this male heir that he's desired for many years. She saw what happened to the last queen, so it was time to get to work. So on September 7th, 1533, Anne gives birth to a premature but healthy girl, and she was named Elizabeth, aka Gloriana, aka the Virgin Queen, aka Good Bess, aka this baby would one day become one of the most well-known successful monarchs in English history, Elizabeth. If you haven't noticed yet, I really love Queen Elizabeth. I love her. But of course, Henry and Anne, they don't know that this precious baby that they hold in their arms is going to be an amazing monarch, just ahead of her time, who would be loved by her people. So all they saw in this moment was that this was a girl. So we've got to try again. We have to try to have another baby who has a penis, pretty much. And plus, England needed an heir as well. And as I've talked about before, girls couldn't be heirs at this time, unfortunately. So less than a year after Anne gave birth to Elizabeth, there were rumors going around in the castle talking about it looked like Anne was pregnant. You know how people like to talk. But there was nothing recorded from that time that states that Anne was actually pregnant. So it's possible that what she had could have been what's known as a phantom pregnancy. It's a really sad situation to be in because the woman will feel a lot of the same symptoms and experience a lot of the same physical changes that a woman who's actually pregnant will go through and feel, but there's no baby. Anne was in a situation where she really wanted to give Henry a son, and there's this large amount of pressure. So it's possible possible that she ended up having these symptoms because of the stress and the pressure that was put upon her in this situation. Some of the symptoms that women can feel from phantom pregnancies include morning sickness, bloating, like their stomach will actually grow as if they are pregnant, swollen, sore feet, including weight gain. That was something that she potentially went through at this time. So while Anne is working on giving Henry in England an heir, unfortunately Henry's first wife, Catherine, dies. She passes away on January 7th, 1536. And when Catherine died, Henry and Anne, they were partying it up.
Oh, she passed away? Oh. All right.
Just trifling, you know what I mean? It's just trifling, because first of all, they were happy because Anne now is just queen. Like, there is nobody that can rival her. There's nobody that can replace her. I'm queen, done deal. Henry's looking at it like this marriage is even more legitimate. And again, I must emphasize this, married 25 years, wife to his first child. It's just messed up. Is it just me? I don't know. I just think it's disgusting. In a sense, though, Anne did have every reason to be happy about this. There were a lot of supporters of the Catholic Church, including the Catholic Church themselves, that felt like Catherine was still the legitimate Queen of England. So let's go back a little bit to that jousting accident, the most recent one Henry had, where he was out for 2 hours and it completely changed his life and potentially his temperament as well. When this was going down, Anne was pregnant. And so during this whole accident, I can imagine this was very stressful for Anne, because something happens to Henry, it could potentially affect her position and her daughter Elizabeth's position. So Anne's pregnant, and after that huge scare of potentially losing Henry, Anne has a miscarriage. This devastates her, of course, as well as Henry. And it's documented that if the child had lived, that it would have been a boy. So this just eats her up. So this just really Henry up. He believed that his inability to produce a male heir was because of him being married to his late brother's widow, Catherine. Him losing this child with a whole other woman who wasn't married to his late brother just kind of really messes with him, I guess. Now with Anne, he so far has only been able to produce a daughter. And then Anne also has this phantom pregnancy, and then she goes on to have a miscarriage. So Henry is really pissed off at this point. And there might have been another miscarriage that took place as well. I'm not entirely sure. And of course, this was all Anne's fault. Henry had nothing to do with it. Anne was crazy for stressing out about this. And it's also said that it could have potentially been another reason why Anne was stressed out. At this time, Henry started flirting with another lady at the court, and Anne knew about this. So it was a lot for Anne to deal with between that, if it was going on, as well as Henry becoming mortally wounded potentially. Henry just put all the blame on Anne for losing this child. I mentioned that Anne had a lot of enemies at court. These enemies liked to gossip about Anne, and some bit of tea that was just splashing all over the hallways in the castle.
Here's the motherfucking tea.
And that was that Anne had fallen out of Henry's good graces, and he had picked up another side piece. After Anne had this miscarriage, Henry was spending a lot of time with another woman who was Anne's lady in waiting. What's kind of interesting was that Anne was his first wife's lady in waiting, Catherine. So it's kind of like history repeating itself. And this lady in waiting that Henry was trying to have an affair with, her name was Jane Seymour. And she also, I guess, could be seen as a commoner compared to the higher lords and ladies in the court. Let me get my tea. Well, it's really coffee. Pinkies up, chaps. Pinkies up.
Lewis got pied and I took his girl.
So this gossip continued to spread, and it got to a point where Anne's life actually became threatened. Gossip started to go around court that Anne was actually having numerous affairs with a lot of people, and it made its way into Henry's ears. By this time, I'm sure you figured out that men were allowed to have affairs and not so much women, especially kings when their queen was pregnant. People living in the Tudor period had a very different idea of what OBGYN was, let's put it that way. They thought that a pregnant woman having sex was very unsafe for the baby. To satisfy the king's urges, if you will, they were allowed to take on a temporary mistress while the wife laid in a dark dank, ill-lit room, which is not healthy, but they thought it was, and waited to come to term. Like, that's pretty much what the deal was. You go sling your all over the place, and I will sit here in the dark until I give birth to your child. That was pretty much the deal. One of Anne's greatest characteristics was that she was very flirty and very fun to be around. Henry knew this when he met her and fell in love with her. It was one of the things that he loved about her that attracted him to her. But unfortunately, this personality trait ended up backfiring against her in the end. So when word got back to Henry that Anne was going around having affairs, he was just completely devastated, but he said, okay, how about we do this? Let's start an investigation. Don't tell her shit. Keep everything on the down low, and we'll see where this turns up. Instead of just approaching her, he just starts this whole investigation. So there was a long list of men that Anne was accused of having an affair with, and this long list included a guy named Sir Henry Norris, who was Henry's groom of the stool and close friend, Sir Thomas Wyatt, who is said to have had a relationship or a courting situation with Anne before her and Henry started talking, and there was also a few other men. Now get this, even her own brother, his name was George Boleyn, even her own brother was accused of having an affair with Anne.
It's time to stop! It's time to stop, okay? No more! Where the f*** are your parents? Who are your parents? I'm gonna call Child Protective Services. It's time to stop!
Why? Like, why? I don't know if it actually happened, but something in my gut tells me that none of this was true. And I have a feeling that by the time you finish this video, you're going to feel the same way. Poor George was arrested for treason and incest. So this is the point that marks the complete downfall of Anne Boleyn. Just mark it right here. This is the point. Right there. So Thomas Cromwell, remember him? Thomas? Yes, there's so many Thomases, but I hope you remember the name Cromwell. Cromwell and Anne, they had a pretty good relationship starting out. He had her back when it came to the whole getting rid of Catherine. They had a pretty good, healthy relationship. But at some point, don't know when exactly, but at some point, Anne had pissed Cromwell off. They were beefing. Cromwell was added to the long laundry list of people that could not stand Anne. So it's believed by some folks that Cromwell had a bit of a hand in Anne's downfall. This isn't to necessarily say that he created the rumors, but it appears that he definitely propelled them, at least, you know. Henry's people went to work on these suspects, specifically one that they tortured quite a bit, and they tortured him to the point where he finally confessed. We don't know if this confession was legit. I mean, under that type of duress, I'd probably say I did it too, because I don't know if you're familiar with some medieval torture devices. They look like hell on earth. It's sus, you know. This confession definitely appears to be a bit suspect. Furthermore, Henry also accuses Anne of bewitching him into liking her. At this point, Henry's just putting the nail in the coffin. He's ready to move on. He's done with Anne. On to the next. Everything was just crashing down around Anne at an exponential rate. So fast that she didn't even have the opportunity to pull Henry to the side and talk to him and say, hey man, what the f-? Like, why are you doing this to me? What's going on, man? I thought you loved me. Like, why can't we talk this out? It's so frustrating. You know, I have so many questions. Henry, did you really believe this bullshit? Or were you just tired of Anne right away because she wasn't able to give you a son yet? Like, did he truly believe that his wife was capable of these terrible things, including sleeping with her brother? Like, what the what? Or was it so that he was so concerned about his image and the potential humiliation tied to this? Because even if it wasn't true, there's still like this level of humiliation around it. So next thing Anne knew, she was being ushered into the Tower of London for her imprisonment, and Henry just disappeared, went away from public life, and never went to go see Anne or anything like that. And then from that point on, Anne's trial would ensue. By the way, I would like to point out at this point that I have not been able to find anything that states there was any sort of evidence that confirms that Anne did any of these things that she was accused of. If you found something, let me know. So during the trial, Anne was accused of all kinds of shit. She was accused of insulting the king's virility, how many snacks he could fit in his codpiece, pretty much. And she was also accused of laughing at his poetry. I mean, I've laughed at his poetry, that's for sure. I mean, it was pretty trash. It was pretty trash. She was also accused of seducing all of these guys due to her uncontrollable lust. Yes, cannot be tamed. They even went on to describe in great detail some of the accused sexual acts that played out between her and her many, many lovers. Like they stated, her and her brother George actually put their tongues down each other's throats.
Oh my God!
Who came up with this? And who was there? Who was sitting in the shadows watching this? And in the end, Anne was convicted of treason, adultery, and incest, and she was to be executed. This also had an impact on Anne's daughter, Elizabeth. Just like Mary, Catherine's daughter, she became illegitimate. Another kid just illegitimate. All these illegitimate kids. And so what that meant was that Elizabeth was removed from the line of succession, just like her big sis, Mary. So while waiting in the Tower of London for her execution, Anne Boleyn's brother, George Boleyn, was executed, and so were all the other men that were accused of being her lovers. So at first, Henry decided that Anne was supposed to be burned alive, but then he went, yeah, she was a queen. I guess I'll upgrade it to a beheading. Okay, she deserves better. Henry decides to hire an expert swordsman from France to behead his wife. This man is supposed to be exceptionally talented in his field. So Henry had Anne beheaded on May 19, 1536. And when she was being led to the scaffold for her execution by her ladies, it is said she stated, quote, "I heard say the executioner was very good, and I have a little neck." She put her hand around her neck and she started laughing. Just imagine the state of mind that woman was in walking to that scaffold. In the end, the same qualities Anne possessed that caught Henry's attention led to her downfall. Her witty, flirtatious, intelligent personality was in the end used against her, and Anne was the first queen in English history to be executed. So 11 days after Anne's beheaded, Henry marries Jane Seymour. Man, he's really good at moving on. In a letter that was written the day before Anne's execution by Ambassador Eustace Chapuis, he was Charles V's ambassador to England. He described Jane's appearance. He described her as being colorless, having average height, her complexion was so white that she may be called rather pale, and that nobody thinks she has much beauty. He also described her as being a woman without great wit. What the f? Moving on. That is just... They don't ever describe the men like this. Jeez. But Chapuis pretty much describes this woman as being the most boring, bland person on planet Earth. And this same man described Anne as like a whore. But if his description of Jane was actually correct in some way, shape, or form, then it's possible that Henry decided he wanted to go with somebody like Jane because she was the complete opposite of Anne. Somebody who was witty and spoke her mind and was very clever and flirtatious. Here you have this quiet, soft-spoken, dull woman who keeps to herself. Chapuis also said that Jane got along with Mary. Anne and Mary never hit it off, for obvious reasons, of course. And it was actually during Henry's marriage to Jane that Mary made her way back into Henry's good graces. Jane was actually fighting for Mary and Elizabeth to become part of the line of succession again, but it never got to that point. But he did end up embracing his daughter Mary once again because of Jane. So Jane had a lot more in common with Henry's first wife, Catherine, compared to Anne. Remember the French fashion sense I mentioned that Anne Boleyn brought with her from France when she came to English court? Well, Jane was like, enough of that slutty shit. Remember my little French hood I had for Halloween? That was something that Anne brought to English court. That was too risque for Jane. She's like, no, we need to cover all of this shit up. And also the extravaganza, eleganza parties that Anne would put on in court were no more. Jane, she didn't like all of that. And unlike Anne, Jane was not involved in political affairs. She was quiet and she stayed to herself and she knew her place, quote unquote, knew her place. There was one time that Jane tried to speak her mind regarding something politically charged, I guess, and Henry was like, ha! He told her, remember what happened to the last queen that decided she wanted to be involved. So a queen could create a motto or saying that represented who she was. I'm not entirely knowledgeable on how the whole thing works. I don't know if all queens had a motto. I don't know if it was just an English thing or if it was throughout all of Europe or whatever. But all I know is that a lot of these queens had mottos, and generally they were based on how I guess they wanted to be as a queen. I guess. Catherine's motto was humble and loyal, and Boleyn's motto was the most happy, and Jane Seymour's was bound to obey and serve. Just wanted to give you an idea of what this woman represented to herself, I guess. Anyway, that's the end of part 6. I really hope you liked it. I really want to wrap up the Henry VIII series because I am enjoying it. One of my favorite periods in history is Tudor history, but I'm really excited about the next person that I'm going to cover on this channel. So can't wait for that, I guess. And he is actually a living historical figure who I actually had the pleasure of speaking with on the phone a few months ago. So I'm really excited to share that with you guys. Thinking that I'll probably have 2 more episodes with Henry. Yes, 2 more. So we'll wrap it up on a part 8. As always, thank you so much for watching, guys. I love you. Please be sure to tune in again. I'll talk to you soon. Bye. This is part 6 in the little Henry the... So this is part 6 in my little Henry VIII mini... So this is part 6 in my little...
Perfect.